Hey, welcome back to the Popper Metagame. Today we're gonna do some more metagamey kind of stuff. We're actually gonna break down and have a little conversation about a wide range of topics that I think you'll find interesting. One of the things we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at what decks are some of the league leaders in the Popper League playing. Everybody likes to talk about challenge results, and we're gonna talk about that too. But you don't hear people talk as much about the league leaders as far as the trophies. So if you pull up the Friendly Pauper League, for example, we have this thing called undefeated trophies. If you go 5-0 in a league, you get an undefeated trophy. And then there's a little leaderboard here. And Amora's 27 has 12 undefeated trophies, and Carves has 12 undefeated trophies out of 738 players that are currently in the league. And you can imagine several, I don't know, I have no idea how these numbers actually work. Maybe it's a few hundred more, maybe it's 2 or 3 times that many people have cycled through the league. This 738 people just represents the number of people that are currently active in the league. I would imagine there's probably a lot more people that have played in the league at some point. And out of all these people, you've got two lone standing champions, clearly having distinguished themselves as knowing what the heck they're doing, because you don't just get lucky into having 12 undefeated leagues in any format. You've got to have a little bit of skill, maybe a little bit of luck, but you've also have to have a good, clear sense of picking the right deck and playing it well and all that good stuff. Blah de blah de blah. Anyway, one of the things we're also going to talk about, there's this one of the reasons I want to really dive into what's going on in Pop right now is because there's a lot of people talking about how we need to ban some blue cards. And frankly, I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong for a few different reasons. But before I get to that, let me give you a little bit of a more specific roadmap for what we're going to do today. First, as a lead in, I'm just going to give a little brief explanation for why I don't think we need to have a ban of any kind. Spoiler alert, it's because the reasoning that a lot of people are using is all wrong in the first place. And second of all, I'm not sure the data backs it. And lastly, I don't even think we have enough data to do anything right now. But after we get done with that, we'll actually get into our main 3 goals for today, which is to break down what the league leaders are playing in the Pauper League, break down some of the recent challenges. I'd like to look at the 4 most recent Pauper challenges, look at the top 32s. Let's really dig into those a little bit and see what we can actually figure out just at a glance. And then we're going to take a look at the cards that define the Pauper format on Goldfish, and we're going to reality check that a little bit, sort of cross-check it versus what we're seeing with the leagues and the challenges to see if that's really true, and talk a little bit about how the data that Goldfish is operating on is flawed. It's not that you shouldn't pay attention to Goldfish. Goldfish is an incredible, amazing resource, but you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's not perfect information you're getting. So you've got to use different metrics and look at different packages of data and try to synthesize that in your mind so that you're not just taking everything and buying into it without questioning it a little bit. So anyway, let's get back to my lead in here, which is people are saying there's too much blue in Pauper. Pauper's got all these decks that are really good that have blue. Blue's all over the place. It's not in a proper balance with the other colors. Therefore, we should ban some blue cards. And this is not a good argument. This is all wrong. Let's take a look at Modern. If somebody was to say there's too many red cards in Modern right now at the top of the league, I mean, all these different Tier 1 decks all have red cards. There's just too much of that going on. We need to balance out the colors a little better. You'd probably get laughed out of the room if you're having a serious conversation with serious players in a serious format. And that's because you don't balance around color. Here's a couple of the ways that you actually make a decision to ban a card. A card is specifically broken. It's warping everything because the card is just too good. It's crowding out other strategies and entire archetypes because it's just so powerful. That's a reason to ban a card. Another thing that you could do is you could ban a particular card to try to optimize metagame diversity. Maybe a card is not entirely too powerful, but it just does something so efficiently that it completely invalidates a whole lot of other strategies and cards. So maybe by banning a single card, you open up the diversity of allowing for another dozen different decks to be played. And maybe an entire archetype can then be played that wasn't really viable before because there was a card that was so oppressive against that archetype or certain decks. Maybe there's a particular mid-range deck that has a particular linchpin card, and that is the default mid-range deck, and any other option is just strictly inferior. So maybe you could have bannings to increase format diversity in terms of the type of decks and the types of archetypes that could be played. But you don't just ban cards to try to open up particular interest in color diversity, because that's just not a real thing. I've been following Magic for some 20 years just about. And until now, I've never heard in any format somebody say, oh, this color's just too good, despite the fact that the color is being utilized in a number of different decks and a number of different strategies, and we can't point to a specific card that's the problem that needs to be banned. Now, I will say in fairness, there are people that say, well, Gush is the problem card. Gush needs to be banned. That would fix things. I've heard other people say, Augur of Bolas is the problem. It needs to be banned. That would fix things. And yet, other people will say, actually, Preordain is the problem, while others say Brainstorm, and some people say Ponder, and some people say all the cantrip cards. And some people will say, no, you need to ban Gush, Preordain, Ponder, Augur of Bolas. You need to ban all the blue cards that are good. And I mean, this is the problem. The fact that there's such a discrepancy of views and opinions on what exactly needs to be banned, I think makes it fairly clear that there's really not a clear identification of the real problem. So anyway, that's the lead in. The other thing is, what makes this so weird is you have a lot of people who point out that basically Izzet Delver, Mono Blue Delver, Blue Black Control, Tireless Tribe, they're all just, in the aggregate, these decks are too good and they all have blue. But these are very different kinds of decks. If you have a lot of different really good strategies that are actually very different and nuanced and create interesting interactions and very interactive gameplay, just because they all share a color and just because they all share certain cards doesn't mean that you need to go out and ban something, especially as Pauper is growing. It's new. There's a lot of people out there who are buying Gushes and Preordains and Ponders, and if you ban them now, you're going to immediately alienate a lot of people. This is especially problematic when the only real data that we have comes basically from taking the surface level information that's given to us on leagues and the Pauper Challenge results, which are basically really tiny tournaments. We're talking about, between 50 to 90 players is generally what we've got. And when we get to a place where we've actually got some really big paper tournaments with top eights that are playing out, and we can get some data that comes back from a really large series of Pauper tournaments, I hope we get there someday. If it turns out that the top eights are all just stacked to the hilt with Tireless Tribe, Izzet Delver, and Mono Blue Delver decks, so be it. Make a ban decision at that point. If you think, that a card that overlaps in all those decks needs to be banned, probably Preordain or something like that, or Augur of Bolas, whatever the case may be, okay, fine. But it's just too soon, and it seems this is very shaky, and I think a lot of people are also assessing a problem that isn't necessarily there. The other thing I have to put out there is I think there's probably a lot of people that are jumping in new to Pauper that are just trying to play whatever's really quote-unquote good. So I think there's a lot of people playing Izzet Delver and Mono Blue Delver, just jumping out and picking up the quote-unquote best deck out the gate. And I think these decks might even be being played a little bit too much right now. But we'll get into that. Anyway, let's shift gears and let's just look at what are some of these top players in the leagues actually playing. Now again, I know that a lot of people like to look at the challenge data and they consider that to be what really matters. And yes, a Pauper challenge is a lot more useful than looking at a couple of Pauper league results. But I think that when you're talking about a lot of different Pauper leagues and aggregating that information versus a medium-sized tournament with 70 or 80 people, I think that the league information is actually quite valuable. And you don't have to believe me. You can go look at what some of the pro players have had to say about standard when they're going into a pro tour and looking at the league information and what's going on in the leagues with standard is something that the pros actually they consider that information to be fairly valuable in terms of assessing what's going on with the format. So anyway, let's jump right into it. So this is a Morris 27 with 12 undefeated trophies. We're just going to go to MTG Goldfish. We're going to select the deck option here. We go to metagame. From there we go to advanced search. Make sure we click user, type in the player name, adjust our date range going back to January, so we've got a little bit of a broader spectrum of dates. So we're looking at what a Morris is playing from January 2nd through May 16th, and they're on Izzet Blitz. Now keep in mind, this is not Izzet Delver, and while I will admit, yes, this is a deck that's playing blue, so people that are going to advocate that blue is too popular, too good, or whatever, I guess you could say this gives them further ammunition. But this is not a reinforcement, again, that any one particular type of deck is dominant. I mean, this isn't even, I mean, if you ask most people in the dark, hey, what's the top best deck in the format? A lot of people might say, Izzet Delver? And they might say Tireless Tribe. They might say Mono Blue Delver. I don't think you're going to find many people that just shot in the dark are going to say, Izzet Blitz, baby. That's the stuff. And you know what? I think this deck being good is really great. This is just really, really great, and I'll explain why. When you really look at Izzet Blitz, it's very different from Tireless Tribe, because Tireless Tribe is utilizing circular logic, and it's got, usually most lists have 3 Dispel in the main board. So you've got a lot of consistency in being able to jam Tireless Tribe and protect it with counter magic. Not only that, but you can jam Tireless Tribe on turn 1, which means you can get in there for the combo kill on turn 2. So Tireless Tribe, definitely a good deck, maybe a little too good, that could be argued. But when you look at something like Izzet Blitz, your actual combo threat isn't going to come down until the earliest on turn 2, maybe not even until turn 3, depending on whether you're deploying a Killing Fiend or a Nivix Cyclops. Next up, this deck is particularly soft to Edict, especially if you're playing Chainer's Edict, which is a sorcery, because Dispel counters an instant. So let's say that we drop Killing Fiend and we don't have any other creatures, which is not that unusual of a scenario, or maybe we've got a couple of Killing Fiends but our opponent has a couple of Chainer's Edicts. We play a Killing Fiend, our opponent plays Chainer's Edict. Brainstorm's not going to help, Dispel doesn't help, Probe doesn't help, Lightning Bolt doesn't help. Mutagenic Growth might protect against burn, but it's not going to help against an Edict. Ponder and Preordain, yeah, those are so broken, but they don't do squat about an Edict, do they? I guess I could Vapor Snag my guy back to my hand, but negative tempo, bad for mana, card disadvantage. I mean, it's something, but it's not great. Apostle's Blessing can give protection, but that's not going to do a whole lot. Daze is, good, I guess, if that trick will work the first time. After that, they're just going to make sure that they hold a mana open, and they're going to be able to do that because, again, we're not really getting in there until turn 3. I mean, maybe if we're on the play and everything plays out perfectly for us and we combo on turn 3, but you just can't expect that every time. And then we got Battle Rage and Gush. So, I mean, really, other than being able to maybe have a Daze, which is very situational and gets even tougher when our opponent knows we're running it, because then they can potentially play around it, I mean, we just don't have a lot of answers to an Edict effect. This is very different from Tireless Tribe, and there's a lot of Chainer's Edicts out there. Even when we go to the sideboard, you've got Stormbound Geist, which is a little bit of Chainer Edict bait, but we've only got a couple, so you may or may not draw one. I mean, we could go to wonky stuff like trying to, again, bounce our own creatures, but this doesn't feel great. Outwit, counter target spell targets player. Now, this is actually useful against an Edict effect, but we only have it as a one of. And yeah, that's it. I mean, you'll find other lists that maybe have some extra negates and stuff like that, but generally the deck is pretty soft to Edict effects, just straight up. And if you have some Chainer's Edicts, and maybe you've even got some Diabolic Edicts, which admittedly can be stopped by Dispel, but if you're running something like Chainer's Edict plus Innocent Blood, forget about it, man. It's going to be a bad time for Izzet Blitz. So anyway, even if you're just running a traditional blue-black list with some Chainer's Edicts and some counter spells and some other removal, the blue-black matchup is not really supremely great for Izzet Blitz, but Izzet Blitz can have some explosive starts. It's got a lot of power. It's explosive. It's fun. It's just great. It just fits in perfectly. It's a strong deck with a strong Achilles heel, and that's perfectly fine. We'll move along. But Amoris, again, not playing a Delver deck, not playing Tireless Tribe. Keep that in mind. Next up, let's see here. Okay, here's Carves. Carves, Boggles, Koldatha-Boros, Boggles, Affinity. By now you're like, wait, who's Carves again? Carves has 12 undefeated trophies. He's tied at the #1 spot. And actually, last week, Carves was leading the league. Amoris is managed to catch up. But Carves has consistently been at the top. Yeah, and look, not a single, what's this? No blue mana in any of the stuff he's been running lately. This month it's been Koldatha-Boros and Boggles. What? Mind blown! So yeah, if you went around and polled people and you're like, okay, there's a couple of people who have 12 undefeated runs through the Pauper League. Are they on Izzet Delver or Mono Blue Delver or Tireless Tribe? Most people would be like, oh, it's probably like a Tireless Tribe deck and a Izzet Delver. How about neither? How about a guy who's not even playing any islands and another person who's going Izzet Blitz like a boss? So probably, again, not what most people expect who are listening to all this chatter. We got to ban some blue cards, blah de blah de blah. All right, next up, all right, let's see what we got next. We've got Al-Moslemi. I'm probably butchering that a bit. So let's see if we can find that. Okay, here we go. And here we do actually find Izzet Delver. So again, I'm not saying this isn't a super strong deck. I'm not saying it's not tier 1 and thus one of the best decks in the format. I'm just saying it's not so dominant that it deserves a ban. It just isn't. We're coming in here as not just #3, but a clear #3. We're talking about 3 trophies of difference dividing where Al-Moslemi is at and the next 2 leaders. So yeah, I mean, doesn't seem to be something you should be worried too much about here. All right, let's see what we have next. Next up is Mezel, the Mesli. Let's see if we can find Mezel. And here we get our Mono Blue Delver list. So again, Mono Blue, we got another Delver deck. Delver's good. I'm not saying it's amazing, but #3, #4, good. All right, next up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're gonna go through 6th place just because after that we run into a whole boatload of people with 5 trophies. So it feels like we've got a pretty clearly established top 6 players, and then a little murkier after that. So we're just gonna go top 6. Just because, that seems to clearly work out as a nice clear delineating point. So next up is Sayaki, something like that. I apologize to whoever this is that I'm probably butchering their name. And you see blue-red, so you're like, is it Delver or is it Blitz? Whoa, is it Blitz again? How funky is that, right? This again, it's a good deck. I don't know how many people would expect that there's more Izzet Blitz out there at the top than Izzet Delver. And again, this is just a deck that's, yeah, it's powerful, it's explosive, it's kind of combo-y. It can be frustrating if you don't have any ways to interact with this. But if you've got, another thing I would point out is if you've got a fog effect, yes, they can dispel it, but fog effects are also pretty good. For example, the Turbo Fog deck, because it's actually got fogs and counter spells, is kind of hilarious to watch against something like this, because this deck doesn't run a whole boatload of counter spells. Usually got maybe a couple dazes and a few dispels. That's about it. So anyway, yep, look at that. Izzet Blitz back again. All right, let's see what else we've got. Helutech. Wait, I don't know if Helutech's actually next. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, Helutech is up next. So Helutech is interesting because now we see inside out combo for the first time, but not exactly. Because this inside out combo from 4/8/2018, and when we look at the Pauper League, This started April 18th, so we're looking for stuff after April 18th to fall in the current league. This April 8th actually was a little too early, and also it's a Pauper Challenge. You don't get any trophies towards the Pauper Leagues for what you do in the Pauper Challenges. So we see that in a couple of older Pauper Challenges, we had some inside out combo being played, and we don't have Helutech results from any recent Pauper Challenges, but what we do have is from the first day of the new league, we've got blue-red, and this is actually not Izzet Delver, it's not Izzet Blitz, it's blue-red Control. What? Yeah, I know, this is actually kind of fringe. You don't see a whole ton of blue-red Control floating around out there. And I mean, you've got stuff like Deep Analysis, Pieces of the Puzzle, Exclude, Counterspell, Accumulated Knowledge. You do have Preordains, but just a singular playset. And the reason I'm just kind of talking about some of the blue cards in this deck is, okay, let's say you ban Brainstorm, Preordain, Ponder, Augur of Bolus, Gush. The only thing this deck list really loses is the Preordains, and when you're playing a control shell like this, you could probably get away with just throwing in some Serum Visions and just going right down the road. I mean, there's so many good blue cards in the format. Just willy-nilly banning some random blue cards is not even necessarily going to accomplish what you want to see. It could even have some negative consequences you don't anticipate, and there's just so many good blue cards out there. Anyway, this is not the most interesting thing about Helutech. The most interesting thing is more recently we see him on white-black, and I think this is pretty cool because Pestilence is really good against a lot of the stuff at the top of the format right now. So these mono blue tempo decks and these blue red tempo decks, they all have fairy packages. They all have creatures that max out at 2 toughness. I guess mono blue also has the Spire Golems, but I mean even 4 toughness, it doesn't matter that much. Basically, Pestilence just wrecks these decks hard. We've even got an extra Crypt Rat in here. We've got life gain, so we're also going to beat up on burn decks. I just think that Pestilence shells have a lot of potential right now because I'm pretty high on Serrated Arrows as a sideboard card, specifically for beating up on tribe decks and these tempo fairy decks. And Pestilence does the same thing. Also has great game against elves. Just does a lot of different things. These decks tend to be dirtly and they tend to lack the card advantage to go deep against really card advantage intensive decks like blue-based Tron decks and blue-black control decks. But you do have a lot of dirtily card advantage options, and because of Palace Sentinels, you can potentially have a situation where you're able to go the distance fighting on card advantages and axis of gameplay if you can stick a Palace Sentinels and maintain the Monarch token. Basically taking the same strategy as Boros Monarch, only you're just going with Orzhov Monarch with the Pestilence backup. So, you know, a lot of times if you're going to build a deck, you have to ask, am I just doing the same thing that another deck is doing but doing a worse job of it? I.e., instead of playing this deck, I should just be playing Boros Monarch. And this is true in most situations, except Pestilence is a game changer that could be a good reason to actually go white-black Monarch token instead of white-red Monarch token. So anyway, these are some things to consider. Helutech again though is our, let's see, what is this, our fifth place, wait, where is this, fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, I guess Helutech actually rounds out as our 6th person in this league, tied for 5th with Sayaka Siaki, or whatever that is, sorry about that heinous butchering of the name. But Helutech is just, you know, he seems to have pivoted to a not blue strategy, which is also interesting. So to summarize, we have no players in the top 6 of this league trophy wise on Tireless Tribe, which is interesting, not something I would have expected, because frankly I think there's arguments to be made that Tireless Tribe is actually the best deck in the format. Even still, no copies up here. We've got mono blue Delver with a copy, and we've also got blue red Izzet Blitz with a copy. But we've got two copies, actually, I'm sorry, we've got two copies of Izzet Blitz, and then we've just got the one copy of Izzet Delver. And then we've got a few decks up here that aren't running blue at all. We've got Carves playing different combinations of non-blue decks. Helutech settling on a non-blue deck. So, you know, and of course Carves is up here tied for first with no islands. So I think this is an interesting data point. It's not the kind of exciting, catchphrase, throw it out there. Oh my gosh, somebody playing Izzet Delver won the challenge 2 weeks in a row. You got to dig a little deeper to really look at this stuff. Also, again, I think a lot of people are jamming Delver-based mono blue and blue red Delver decks. So I think the stuff may even be getting a little overplayed right now. But even at that, it's still, these are not dominating the Pauper format. This is just a complete misconception. So now that we've talked about that, let's pivot and let's actually talk about the challenges a little bit. So let's start with, this is our Pauper challenge from May 13th, just a couple days ago. We did have a Izzet Delver deck take it down, so credit where credit is due there. So we've got in our top 8, we've got Izzet Delver, then we've got a couple Stompies, we've got Green Priney, by the way. Green Priney's been playing Tireless Tribe combo forever, so when you see Green Priney on this deck, it's not just that the deck is good, it's that Green Priney has been tinkering and jamming this deck forever. He knows the deck really, really well. He's an innovator on the deck. So, if you really know a deck really well, that's always going to help you a bit. Really, you got to take that into account every time you see Green Priney up here on this list. So that's number 4. Number 5 looks like this is probably a Tron list. It is in fact a Tron list. And then what in the world? Is this a mono black? This is good old fashioned mono black control. And then we've got blue black control. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we've got another copy of Inside Out combo in the top 8. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at some of these. We're going to start with the Delver decks and see how many Delver decks showed up this time around. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Delver decks in the top 32. And from what I've typically seen, there's usually, it's not like all the Delver decks are in the top 32. Usually there's just as many Delver decks not in the top 32. But looking at 7 Delver decks in the top 32 with only one of those in the top 8, so looking at what was the percentage of the total Delver decks converting from top 32 into the top 8 is 1 out of 7, which is, I don't know what that is. That's like worse than 20%. Next up in second place we've got, and second place and third place are both Stompy. Oh, by the way, this just shows us what the final Swiss standings were. They don't actually show you who won the tournament. You have to go dig around a bit more for that, and those results are usually always out there on the Pauper Reddit. So if you really want to, if you're curious who actually won the thing, you can go check that out. But this information, I'm mostly curious about getting into top 8. I think that's a good enough metric to operate on. So anyway, let's see how many Stompy decks we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Stompy only had 5 deck lists in the top 32, and 2 of those 5 actually got in, so we're looking at about a 40% conversion rate. This is more than double the conversion rate of Izzet Delver in terms of getting in. Also, look at this. You've got a 6-0 Izzet Delver list, but you also have 2 6-0 Stompy lists. So by just about any metric you want to look at it, really, the Stompy lists are performing basically twice as well as the Izzet Delver lists. And people might think I'm just like, cherry picking or whatever. I'm just pulling this stuff up at random. And you know what, if you want to dig deep, dig deep. But I'm pretty sure the more you look at this, the more you're going to see that basically these Delver lists, there's a really good argument to be put forward that they're just being overplayed. And if a lot of people show up to a tournament on a particular deck list, and it's a decent deck list, it's not a bad deck list, then you're going to see some copies manage to float their way into the top 8. It's just, nature of the game, so to speak. Anyway, let's look at Tireless Tribe. Tireless Tribe has 1, 2, 3, 4 copies in the top 32, with half converting to top 8 for a 50% conversion rate, making it basically the best thing we're looking at so far, which is not surprising because it is really, really good. I think the first time I ever talked about Tireless Tribe on my channel, it was still pretty fringe, but I mentioned how it was a better deck than what it was being represented as in the metagame information you'd find on Goldfish. And let's see, next we've got Tron, which, let's see, looks like one. I don't think this is a Tron list, but let's just check. No, it's not. It's Gone combo. So there's one Tron list. This is probably Tron. No, it's some wild, crazy combo. So we've got one Tron list so far. Let's see if this is Tron. You always have to check when you see these wonky color combinations. So there's two. And looks like, so we got 3 Tron lists for about a 33% conversion rate into top 8. Basically the same thing as the Izzet Delver, or slash combined Delver deck results. A little bit worse than Stompy, still pretty respectable. Mono black, good heavens, this is like probably the only list in the top. There's only one mono black deck list in the top 32 and the top 8. It's 100% conversion, but I don't know if you really want to be on mono black. There's a pretty big question mark surrounding that. So then let's take a quick look at blue black control to round things out. And there's been a whole boatload of blue black control. Looks like that scaled way back this event, and we just have the one. So it looks like this is, maybe I missed one, but it looks like this is also 100% conversion rate to top 8 from top 32. Next, I will last mention we've got an Izzet Blitz outside of the top 8 at 5-1, but still 5-1's pretty good, pretty decent, and it looks like it's the only list in the top 32 as far as this Izzet Blitz goes. So not bad. I mean, not amazing, but not bad. So yeah, there you go. I mean, I think these results don't make it clear that there's any particular blue card or any particular blue deck that is so powerful and dominant that you just absolutely must do something about it. You could make an argument again about Gush or Preordain or Augur. That is on the table, but again, you've got a lot of these blue-black control lists that are doing reasonably well that don't run Gush. So if you're also concerned about these kinds of decks, that puts you back on Preordain or the Augur of Bolus. Anyway, we will move along to our next Pauper Challenge. So let's see, this is going back to May 6th. This is basically the second, or I guess this would have been, I think this was the first Pauper Challenge we had this month, second oldest challenge. Here we have Green Priney taking the only undefeated finish in this tournament, at least in the Swiss, at 7-0. And then we've got an Izzet Delver deck, a Koldatha Boros deck, a White Weenie deck, an Affinity list, a couple more Izzet Delver lists, Koldatha Boros. So here you see it's like, whoa, okay, so we've got 3 Izzet Delver lists up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3 Izzet Delver lists. So let's see what we've got here. We've got 1, 2, 3 Delver lists. What is this mono blue? I guess you could argue different things. This is a Delver list that sort of flip-flops into a mill list. So I think some people call this Milver. We'll just exclude it, even though it's basically also a Delver list. But 1, 2, 3, and then we got 4, 5, counting the mono blue list with the Izzet Delvers because it's operating on the same axis. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're talking about there's just so many people jamming these lists. And again, you might be like, oh, well, that just means they're in the top 32. I mean, what if they're just all doing really well and making top 32? But I'm telling you, they're not. If you go and check the data that people aggregate on Reddit, you'll find there's plenty of these Delver lists that are not in the top 32 as well. There's just a lot of people jamming these lists. And when you look at 3 top 8s, that sounds good until you realize there's 10 lists in the top 32, and you're still looking at like, 30% something conversion rate. And then you look at something like Koldatha Boros, or, again, usually you're going to see Tireless Tribe really performing really good as well. So again, here we've got, let's see, is there, okay, so there's only two inside out decks in the top 32, so 50% conversion rate for Tireless Tribe, which is really good. And then on the Boros, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lists. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Quildatha Boros also with a 50% conversion rate. So basically Quildatha Boros is kind of doing the same thing as far as white-blue Tireless Tribe, and doing a lot better than Izzet Delver. And you can continue to look at this. You've got an affinity list that made it into the top 8 with 100% conversion from top 32 to top 8, because there's no other affinity lists out there in these results. And okay, so here's an affinity list that went 6-0 going back to April 29th, the last Pauper Challenge in April. We've got a burn list, Quildatha Boros, a couple Stompies. Oh, here's another affinity list in top 8. And when we get back down to the bottom of the top 8, we've got a couple of Izzet Delver lists. But I'm guessing again, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, we've got 7 Izzet Delver lists. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this time they convert 2 out of 7, which is a little better than I think what we've been seeing, but it's still not like the kind of dominance that you ban something over. We really see Stompy doing better. In this particular situation, we've got a couple of 6-0 Stompy lists, and in total we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So Stompy with a 50% conversion rate from top 32 to the top 8. So you can keep going. I would encourage you, if you really are curious about this kind of stuff, you can just parse through. You can start out by looking at what people are playing in the leagues. Then you can go over and look at challenge results, kind of just look at what's going on between the top 32 and the top 8. And then from there, if you really want to go deeper, you go to the Pauper Reddit and look for the total data on all the decks in the event, including those that did not make it into the top 32, to really do a complete analysis. So anyway, with that in mind, let's pivot here at the end and let's talk about reality checking the league information on Goldfish. I've noticed some people have been making arguments based on, if you go to MTG Goldfish, you go to decks, you go to format staples, then you go to Pauper, and basically it says that Izzet Delver is the most played deck in Pauper. That's basically what this is saying, because these are all just straight up Izzet Delver cards. Now, I get it. Some people will be like, that's not really what it means. It means Preordain's being played in a whole lot of decks. But yeah, that's true. Pyroblast, that's true. But I actually think that Counterspell in a whole lot of different decks, like, the Counterspell doesn't see play in Tireless Tribe combo. It sees play in the blue blacklist and in Mono Blue Delver and Izzet Delver, and this is basically it as far as mainstream tier 1 stuff. So I don't know. I think the other thing that's really interesting about all this is when you look at the top creatures, you don't even see Tireless Tribe. And Tireless Tribe could, the Tribe deck could arguably be the best deck in Pauper, and that's not over here. Also, Stompy's quite good, but I mean, you're not going to run a lot of the, Vines of the Vastwood sees a little play here and there. Nettle Sentinel sees play in Elves. Burning Tree Emissary sees play in Stompy and Aggro Red decks, but a lot of these cards aren't going to see play in a lot of different lists. Admittedly, Preordain and Ponder will see play in a lot of different lists, and Hydroblast and Pyroblast will see play in a lot of lists. But if you just look at these cards at a glance, it basically tells you that, wow, Izzet Delver is all over the place, is basically what it says. But I think this is a little bit of a misrepresentation. You have to keep in mind the only options that Goldfish has is it can pull data from the league information that's released, which is really, intentionally misleading information. We only get to find out, the different kinds of decks that are 5-0ing. We don't get to find out how many 5-0 results each particular deck has. In addition, we get the challenge results, But if there's a lot of people buying into a certain psychology about what's good, you're going to have a little bit of an artificially warped meta. And if you really think about it, this can happen. For example, the kind of metagame you're going to find at a Pro Tour is not the same as the kind of metagame that you're going to find at a Star City Games event or a Grand Prix. These could all be very different kinds of metagames depending on what's going on and the kind of views and beliefs that people hold in those circles that are playing there. Also, I will say I think you're more likely to see people jamming really aggressive style decks in the leagues because it gets you to your result faster. All other things being equal, if you're going to consistently 3-2 a league, you want to do that on a deck that's going to get done quicker because as far as your returns per hour, you're going to make more tickets on a deck that gets those matches finished faster. Versus when people hop in a challenge, a lot of times they're going to be more interested in making sure they control their fate. I think there's a lot of people who feel very uneasy about, jamming an aggro list just because they feel like they might have less control over whether or not they're going to have to mulligan, even if that aggro list statistically has more upside than a deck that has preordains in the list to help feel like you've got more control over making sure you can smooth out your mana and whatnot. All of this is to say, I do think you see slightly different metagames in the challenge tournaments versus the leagues. And I don't know how many, you don't hear a lot of people point out that kind of nuance. So this is to say, when you're going in, if all you're interested in Pauper is playing in side events, which are basically little Swiss events with no top 8, or mostly just jamming the Pauper leagues, it's a very different metagame that's still very wide and diverse, and I just don't think that there's even any problems. And even when you break down the challenge information, I don't think it's abundantly clear that you've got the kind of dominance that warrants any kind of a ban, at least not in terms of a particular archetype or a particular deck. And again, balancing on color, to me, this is a nonsensical thing that I've never even heard of until people started talking about it in Pauper. And that's not a good sign. If Pauper is going to grow up and become a serious format, we can't have these weird idiosyncratic arguments being made for ban decisions that you don't see in other formats. It's going to relegate you to being a second tier kind of a format if you do that kind of stuff. Anyway, the whole point is you just got to take this stuff with a grain of salt. MTG Goldfish is a fantastic site. It's awesome. I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to the founders for setting this up and giving us all this great information. But the information is very skewed. And really, we can't get to a place where we can intelligently make ban decisions until we can either see all of the information and all the data under the hood that Wizards of the Coast hides from us, or we start getting some 300, 400, 500 plus player Pauper events with top 8s, like real serious big events. Once we've seen a dozen or so of those kind of events, then I think we can start to really break down that data and draw some serious conclusions about what, if anything, needs to be banned. In the meantime, as a lot of people are getting into paper Pauper for the first time, let's not pull the rug out from underneath them and all of a sudden, just as they're getting into something brand new, they have to change decks because some of their cards got banned. I think that's a bad idea, and it's a bad thing to do to people just as they're getting into a format. Now, once we get a year or two down the road after Pauper's been sanctioned and we've got big events going on and people are already pretty well into the format, if you got to make ban changes for the good of the format, go for it. But right now, it's just not the time, and we don't have the right kind of data. Also, the data we do have, you really have to parse it in the most superficial ways to come to any conclusions that would inspire you to want to ban something, like just clicking a few buttons on MTG Goldfish and looking at how Goldfish defines the Pauper metagame as far as most played cards. And I just think this is skewed. I think when you dig a little deeper, I don't think that Counterspell is actually the 5th most played card in the format in terms of either weighting the best decks. If you're just trying to say, like, is Counterspell the 4th best card in the format? No. If you were to take all of the actual decks you're going to run into in a challenge or in the leagues. I don't think the counterspell is the fourth most frequent card you're going to have to play against. So, you know, assess that as you will. Take it with a grain of salt. Dig in and see what you can find out for yourself. But anyway, the bottom line here is Izzet Delver. I don't even think it's the best deck in the format. I think that we still have a long way to go. There's a lot going on. The metagame is adjusting right now. And just here at the end, let's take a quick look at a snapshot of where things are at. Look at this. We see Tron and Stompy floating to the top. Natural predators of Izzet Delver. And Tron also feeds reasonably well on both Delver decks. So, yeah, okay. And then Koldatha has legitimate game against both Delver decks as well. So, I mean, you're starting to see, and look at this. Oh, Affinity's coming back. This Affinity had dropped way off. It's just kind of slowly creeping back up. So, you know, give the metagame time before we all go freaking out. The Pauper metagame adjusts real slowly, but it does adjust. So, don't panic. Hang in there. And, yeah, we'll see where things go. And, oh, SCG Con's coming up. This could potentially be our first really, really big Pauper tournament where we're actually going to have a top 8, and I'm guessing that SCG is going to probably have somewhere where they report the information on the total number of players in the event along with the top 8s or the top 8 results. So that to me is going to be particularly exciting and interesting, and I do expect that there will be some of the usual offenders showing up, probably an Izzet Delver list in there. Maybe a tireless tribe list or a mono blue list, but I don't think you're going to see just multiple. I don't think you'll see more than 2 copies of any one of those deck lists, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of those decks isn't even in the top 8, and you just see some other random stuff in there that represents how healthy the Pauper metagame actually is. The last thing I would say is a lot of these kind of decks that play blue are not heavy oppressive, like play 20 counter spells. And it's not that kind of stuff. It's these interactive tempo decks that you really can get ahead of or play around or play on a different axis where you can blow out their strategy. They don't have the best card advantage options, though they usually have good card advantage options. They're not the most aggressive, though they do present an aggressive strategy. They're not really the best at any one thing. They just have a really good mix that's able to throw you off and beat you if you're not ready for it. So, yeah, it's a good place to be. There's been much, much worse stuff at the top of the metagame throughout the course of Pauper, and this is actually pretty healthy compared to where it's been at a lot of points. So, anywho, I hope you guys have a great day. Hop in those leagues, and if you do, hopefully you'll make a big fat stack of tickets. Have a good one. Peace out, everybody.